Hi everyone, I'm going to start with part 2 of the Freesia tutorial, and these are just a few little roses and flowers that I painted before that I wanted to share with everyone. And this is the little Freesia with some of the color swatches. I'm going to show you some of the colors that I used for this tutorial, and you can obviously use your Winsor Newton colors. I will use those greens. I'm going to use some of the sepia, and I will mainly use the sepia just to darken certain mixes if I don't want to, for instance, use Payne's grey. Then the other colors that I use is the red violet. I use some permanent yellow, some lemon yellow, and then some of the quinacridone crimson lake and some bright violet. But you can use any of your purples that you have. It's super windy. I don't know if you can wear the wind, but it's super windy, yeah. And then I'm going to use a tiny little brush. This is from Winsor & Newton, and the numbers are gone. I can't even see what it is. But then also the Good Memory brush number 5, a very fine brush, my putty eraser, and then I also use this tiny little eraser. It's lovely to use if you paint botanical art, and obviously a pencil. You'll need some tissue paper and 2 glasses of clean water. I changed my water often because I don't want any muddy colors. So just make sure that you keep your water clean, and also make sure that your hands are clean. When you have cream on your hands and you touch your paper, you will not be able to paint over the cream because it's oily. So I'll talk about the colors now, and I'll mention them during the video, or I'll mention them as a note on the video so you can see all of the colors. But this is the Mission Magello watercolors, the whole set that I bought from Amazon. I made a lovely chart of some of the colors on a video that I will link below. And then this is one of the Freesias from my garden, a very beautiful bright little Freesia, and it's just a short video, a little study that I did that I wanted to do quickly. And then the brushes, obviously I always have 2 glasses of clean water, and then my palettes, I always have these little glass palettes or these tiny little holders that are like this. Enjoy me. I hope you join me in painting this. Just a quick loose study. The paper is lovely to paint on, especially for these studies, and this Canson XL watercolor paper is not expensive. So for these little studies, and also what's nice is you can keep it all in a little book like this. It's got the little spiral ring binder, yeah. So they keep it all together nice and neatly. You can always go back and forth. I've done quite a lot of my YouTube studies on these little in this book, so it's a fun book for these little studies. And let's start with our next part of this Freesia tutorial. So the brush, you can use any brush that you have, preferably something with a nice brush tip. So if you don't have a brush with a nice tip, try and wash it with a little bit of soap and twirl it to make a beautiful tip again, and then leave it to dry for a minute, for a day or two. The next day it will have a nice tip again. There are other ways if your hair is all frayed and like loose and like just horrible sometimes frizzy hair, I would say. So there are ways that you can fix it, especially if it is sable hair. But most of the time when your brushes are synthetic, I don't really know if there's a way that you can fix them, especially if they are already ruined. But you can try some soap and water. That normally does the trick. And what I normally do is, the minute I'm finished with my paintings, I would twirl them already on tissue paper and store them like flat on the paper, and then I will pack them away once they completely dry. That silver part of your brush, if you let your brush dry, when you let it stand up straight, all the liquid and water will go into that part, and the glue will become loose, and all of the hairs will fall out. So just make sure that you look after your brushes. There are numerous videos out there to show you how to look after your watercolor brushes, especially if they are very expensive ones. These ones were very expensive, so I look after them. I also paint with synthetic ones, so it's all up to you. Anyway, let's go back to the painting. Again, this paper is the Kanzen XL watercolor paper. It was lovely to use for this study. I like the way the brush just flows on the paper. Sometimes I do battle with certain studies on this type of paper, but for some reason this one was amazing to paint with or to paint on. You can use your Payne's Grey mix, not your Payne's Grey, your sap green mix if you don't have this specific brand, but the sap green is normally very similar to this. Or you can use some French ultramarine with some transparent yellow. It creates a beautiful green that I love as well. And you'll notice that I use my clean water just to soften those lines often. And I spoke about these books before. I love the way that you can come back at a later stage, even years later, and just refer back to your paintings and just see how you changed over the years, how your painting style changed, how you maybe paint a little bit looser or a little bit more detail. Sometimes I paint a lot of detail, sometimes I paint very loose. It all depends on the amount of time that I have, and also if I just want a quick relaxing loose painting. But a lot of times I paint detail as well, although I think my style change every year. I just find other ways to paint and make it easier and fun for me to paint, and preferably I like to paint obviously something that I like and that I think looks beautiful. So this is a very beautiful color from the Mission Watercolors, and it is called the Red Violet, which is PR122 PB29. So you know the mix is you can use, for instance, your cobalt violet or your bright clear violet with a drop of your normal violet in, or some French ultramarine in. I think it will give you the same color, but you can play around until you get a very warm type of purple like that. It's a beautiful color. I love this color. I've used it often, and I've also used it in my what did I paint? My sweet peas. Yes. So this color was absolutely perfect for the sweet peas. And I thinking of watering my plants now because it's quite dry, but I do use quite a bit of water to soften the markings on this painting. So I will drop in the paint like I do now, then I will drop my brush into the water, or just dip it in the water, and obviously on the tissue paper because I don't want too much water on my paper and in my brush, and then I will just soften it, lift it up like that. I will just lift the colors up until I'm happy and soften it that way, and then it create that beautiful dark hard line on the side there, and that is how you create that hard line. So it looks like another petal is starting there, or is at the bottom. So that's normally how I paint the difference or the two separations between my petals. It's an easy way to get that hard line, and also to have a very soft petal, and I want it all to flow together, and I don't want it to look like it's all separated. So I do go over it later with a glaze. Sometimes if I don't want to lift up some of the pigment, I won't glaze over my painting. The glaze is normally just a water glaze, or sometimes I will use a very diluted, for instance, very, very watery green, or a very watery soft purple mix, but it must be extremely watery because I don't want to soften all of this hard work that I've just painted on my painting. I don't necessarily want to soften it too much so that it all disappears and I have to go back and paint it all again. Again, I'm just darkening the top part of this little bud. These were beautiful, and I think Freesias are the most beautiful little flowers. Well, I have many favorites, but it's one of my favorites, and the smell is just so amazing, and they're just so delicious and so sweet. Sometimes they overpower the smell of your whole living room if you have them in your living room, but that's okay. I don't mind that. My husband minds it quite a bit, but I don't mind it at all. he sometimes says to me, you know, just move the flowers on the patio because the smell is so sweet. But I don't mind it at all because it is so amazing, that smell. It reminds me of summer, like jasmine. Beautiful star jasmines in my garden, also flowering right now. There are thousands of flowers on there, and when you walk past them, it's just such a lovely smell that you just want to lie on top of them, but I can't because they're growing against the walls. Of course I can't do that, but it will be amazing if I could. Just sleep in them. But anyway, I'm going to soften the next bud now, and you can see very watery layers. So I don't wet the whole part completely, so you know, I just water this section by section. It is summer and it is hot, so the paper will dry much quicker than what it would in, for instance, winter. So I always make sure that I wait for my paper to dry completely before I carry on with the next layer. But like now, I would drop in the paint while my paper is wet. And if you're a beginner, rather wait for your paint to dry completely and then go back in with your next layer. That way you won't create muddy colors, especially if you use green and yellow together with beautiful pinks and purples. Again, I'm trying to create that very hard line to distinguish between the two petals on this bud. Also a drop of green on my brush, because these buds had beautiful green purple mixes. So I'm trying my best not to muddy the color, and if I see it's a little bit too dirty, I just pick it up with my brush and I sweep it on, or I wipe it on a piece of tissue paper just to get rid of the excess pigment. And this green again, this green is beautiful because it's also it's like a very warm green, I would say. It's not your normal cold greens. If I have two of my greens together, this is the warmer green. And if you use some of your permanent sap green, you can drop in a tiny drop of yellow, I would say a transparent yellow, just to get the same warm green mix that I have here on my Freesia bud on the stem. And then I go in. Here I have to be very careful, because if I use the wrong purple right now, I will just create a brown mix, and I don't want that. I don't want muddy colors, but I do want to blend these two colors while the paper is wet, because I don't want a hard line at this stage. So I just go in very carefully, and if I notice the color turns brown, I will quickly lift it out with my brush, but it didn't with these colors that I used, and I was quite happy with how it turned out. Again on this side, just dropping in some of that green, and I leave it so it can just flow everywhere there. And if your paper is wet like it is there, then all the colors just flow in and they soften, so there's no hard lines, and that's what I want. I want very soft lines at this stage. I normally go back later and I add more detail, and you'll see I have not too much water on my brush, and I don't have too much pigment on my brush either. I want to create those highlighted bits on those stems that I can see there, what I can see in the reflection when I took the photo. I normally take my photos in the early morning when I water these parts of the garden, and then sometimes I'll go in the afternoon, but then it's already a little bit shady where they are because they're under the deck next to our patio. And like now, it's a thicker consistency on my brush. I don't have too much water on my brush, so I'm trying to paint in those tiny little lines with the tip of my brush, and then those parts are a bit wet that I just dropped in now, so the pigment will flow a little bit, but that's fine, I don't mind that. And then yeah, much thicker consistency on my brush. Now we'll go in and soften it. So I pick up some clean water. Oops, I'm bumping the table. and then I just soften those lines. Again, I'm creating that very distinguished difference between those two parts of the bud. Drop in some of that purple mix, and I want some of that pink, and then I also want to drop in some of the green. I want the stem to flow out of the bottom stem and the bud. I don't want it to look like it's all separated. So keep it going in there quickly with some extra water and paint on my brush. That is the pink mix. I want some of that on that tip of that bud, green part of the bud there. And you'll notice that I drop in the color, then I rinse my brush quickly in clean water, and then I soften those markings. And they then flow all over that petal, not all over the petal, but just a certain section of the petal, so it won't flood the whole page with this purple. I tried to control the colors as best as I could. And this paper absorbs quite a lot of water, so it's quite lovely to paint with. And then some more green. So I just take my time and paint these little parts of the bud. I'm going to paint another bud, by the way, so you'll be able to see what I'm going to do. I don't think you can see it right now, it's very light, but I will darken it a little bit later and paint it in. Some more of that purple mix, purple pink mix. And that is the red violet. So the red violet is that pigment that I gave you earlier if you want to have a look at it. If you maybe have the same colors, but it's the PR122 PB29. So it is a semi-transparent color, that one, but it is absolutely beautiful to paint with. And then I leave little parts of the green to shine through, and then I take the purple just on some sections of that stem. Now I'm going to wet that part again. I want some of that purple mix in there as well. They are soft mixes. For this painting, I really love this paper. Now sometimes I really battle to paint on some different types of paper if it's not art or arches or Fabriano, but in this instance it really went very well. I enjoyed this paper very much, so I've been using it quite often, and especially for these little studies, and I really like it. Like I said before, the Stillman & Bone sketchbooks are quite expensive to import into for us, for South Africa. I don't know if you can get them at all the art stores, but I know that I paid quite a bit of money to bring them in, and it nearly cost as much as the book itself because all our postal services closed down. So this book is a lovely book for me to use because I can go back, like I said earlier, I can go back later or a few years down the line and just look at how I painted, and sometimes I cringe at the way I painted certain things, but it is part of my learning process as well. We all change. I can see it with all artists, even botanical artists. We all change, and we all change our style, and we learn different things, and that is what makes it so interesting with watercolor and even color crayons. And if you want to use some graphite, we all want to learn new things. So that is what's so amazing about what we do, is, and including you, is you will learn by using all of these different techniques and just practicing and painting all the time. Now just smile and have fun and sit back and relax and make yourself a cup of tea and just enjoy the process. If you make a mistake, you can just cover the book up and no one has to see that you made a mistake, and that's as easy as that. You just cover your book and no one will see it, only you will know it. You only have to show them what you want anyone to see, and that is in your sketchbook, and that is fine as well. So on this part, I'm just going in with my tip of my brush and I'm just darkening these little sections, trying to create another little layer of that petal or that little leaf on the petal there. And then I just rinse my brush in clean water and I soften those markings. And I'm trying to connect those two petals by moving it straight over that whole section there. And this way I make sure that I just drop in a little bit more of the green, but I make sure that all of the layers are now completely dry, because if I go back now I might lift up some of those bottom layers and I don't want to do that. But I also want to soften those highlighted little parts of my Freesia bud that I have there. So now I'm going to draw in the second little bud. Like I said before, I promised you another flower bud, and I'm going to go in here and draw it in, and everything just came together in this little Freesia painting. This is a lovely paper to paint on, so if you are looking for something that is very reasonable, not too expensive, but everything is in a binder together like a sketchbook, then this is a very nice book to buy and try. I bought it, so I'm not sponsored at all. I'm not saying you have to buy it, I'm just saying it is very nice paper to use. So it is a little bit more on the rough side, not, or I wouldn't say rough, it's more textured compared to the Art or Fabriano watercolor paper, but the paper is really nice. I really enjoyed painting on this. And also the Mission Magilla watercolors, I am not sponsored by them. I can't tell you how much I love this paper. It is so amazing. Sorry, not paper and paint, but the paint. It is so beautiful to paint with. It is so transparent and so translucent. It's really worth giving it a try. Especially also like Core watercolors. Those brands are really so underrated. I absolutely love Daniel Smith. I love Winsor & Newton. They are Mamre, those beautiful colors as well. Beautiful colors. But I just think sometimes just trying to use a different brand a little bit just to taste and listen to other artists, especially if they tell you, listen, this was a nice brand to paint on, or that was a nice brand to paint on, and taste it for yourself. You don't have to buy a whole set, just try a few little tubes and then you see if you like it. I know Daniel Smith have dot cards because I tried them before, and I know Winsor & Newton too. I don't know if Mission Magilla watercolors have dot cards. I haven't checked, and I also don't know if Core watercolors have those dot cards. It's a pity if they don't, because it will be very lovely if everyone can taste it and try it out. But it's worth looking into those colors if you like them as much as they look on the paper. I can honestly recommend these colors. They are beautiful. And also the amount of different colors that they have. Yes, you can mix a whole bunch of these colors for yourself, but the colors are really beautiful. Now we are nearly finished with this tutorial, and I'm going to paint the rest of the petals. If I don't finish it all in this tutorial, I will show you the end results anyway. But I highly recommend you also try to paint this little Freesia buds of mine. I might give you a line drawing. If I don't, try and draw it yourself. It's fun, also fun to paint. But it's more like a mini tutorial that I did for mainly my patrons on Patreon. And it's just sometimes fun to play around and do like a study, especially on a book like this. Okay, I spoke enough. I think we have to get back to the painting. Again, some of the green, and when you do that, just be careful and try and mix those colors. So for instance, dip your brush in the clean water and soften those colors, especially like the green and between the two colors, so you don't get any brown mixes or muddy mixes. You'll see that in the end one day you will be able to control your watercolors. If you can't do it yet, or if you can, wonderful, because you notice when your colors become muddy. If you don't know how to do that yet, then like I said previously a few minutes ago, just wait for your painting to dry completely and then go back and drop in those colors, because that way you know that your bottom layers and your paper are completely dry and you won't get any muddy colors. So that is the way that I do it normally, is by waiting, or I tell my students to wait for the colors to dry completely before you go in with your next layer, so you don't get those muddy colors. You won't get those muddy colors if you layer in watercolors. If you don't lift up the bottom pigments, you will not get muddy colors. And then again, I'm trying to create those hard lines so that we can distinguish between the two petals. And then I just push the brush and push it against that hard line that I want right there. Did you see that? I use my brush to manipulate my watercolor so that I can create that hard dark line right there, so that it looks like a different part of the petal or the flower bud. Some of the bottom layers, if you already had quite a few or have quite a few layers down, so that way you make sure that your painting is completely dry. Your brush, you wet your brush with the new pigment, but make sure your paper and your painting is completely dry before you put down the next layer. I do use quite a few brush strokes, and that's why I say I make sure that each layer is completely dry before I go in with the next layer, to prevent muddy colors. And now I'm just going to darken that little section there. So there's another little part that looks like I would say, oh, that's load shedding coming through now. It's a reminder on my phone. We are back into our load shedding modes here in South Africa. But you get used to that. 2 hours at a time. At least it's not 4 hours at a time, but yes, 2 hours at a time. Anyway, back to the painting. So yes, I do try and make sure that my paint is completely dry, and get back to that. But I want to also soften those lines and bring in a little bit more purple on that green part of that Freesia. And then I want to leave a lighter section there. So if you notice that it's a bit dark, just take your brush, wipe it on your tissue paper, and then lift out your colors. That way I would say it's like a cloth, and you soak up some of the excess pigment. So it's very nice to create a highlight if you dab your brush on some tissue paper and it's like a dry cloth, and you just put it down on your painting and you remove the excess pigment. Now I want to drop in some of that green, but I want to be careful again. We don't want to create muddy colors, so I'm just very, very careful there. And I didn't wait for it to dry completely, but I noticed that I can manipulate the colors with my brush. I want a darker part there. I spoke a lot. I want a darker part there on that petal there. And I'm going to soften it now with my brush and just smooth it out there very carefully. And that's the other bud that is now finished. Let's see if I can do a bit more. And then I'm just going to go over these parts where I want to darken these little sections. You'll see I just push back that other petal part. When you darken it and you move it, sometimes I notice that if you leave hard lines there, sometimes when beginners start to paint they leave hard lines there. The way you can do it is just push it back and soften it completely till that edge of that line to create that darker little fold there, so that the little difference between the two petals are not so obvious, but they are obvious. I don't know how to explain it better, but by pushing and removing that excess pigment, it will just create a but like it looks like it's lifted, like the little petal part is lifted. I hope that makes sense. So I just normally go against the line, and if it flows a little bit away from that part, I will just take my brush and soften it a little bit more right there. So I just move it in, and again just soften those little parts there, and go back to the part where I painted that so you can see what I meant about pushing the paint back, so there's not a thick hard line there, so that when you look at the petal again, it looks like that little part is sort of lifted and it's a different petal instead of having a big line there. It might not make sense, but anyway, I will explain it one day again in another tutorial. But now I just go over with a very clear wash of watercolor to bring it all together and to soften it. And this is when I talk about a watercolor glaze, is this is what I do just to bring the whole painting together. And I make sure that my water is completely dry and there's no paint on my brush, and that my water is clean, so that I can do this beautiful glaze on the whole petal and the flower, but not to create muddiness. If you are scared, rather wait and don't do that. Don't paint the glaze and don't go over it yet. You'll be able to do that once you know how to do that. But I don't want you to go over that and create a muddy mess and say, Amanda, but you told me to do a glaze and this is what happened. I don't want you to do that, so rather don't glaze it if you're not comfortable with it yet. A lot of us do it just to bring the whole painting together and to soften some of the highlights of our little petals. But for instance, in this case, if you're scared, don't do that. Now I'm going to go and do this part again. I just want to darken certain sections, so you see that I go back in there. I'm sorry, I keep on bumping the table, and the camera's attached to the table. And then I also want to just darken all of these little sections where the stem and the bud connects, and I just do that. These are the fun parts, and I love doing them. That's my favorite part. Now while you sit there, just go make yourself a cup of tea, smile, and be happy that you can paint and enjoy every moment of it. I'm done. I'm going to show you the end result soon when I finish it, but sometimes I also like to leave a few little petals for the imagination, so I don't always paint them, and I might come back years later. But this is the finished part, and I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for watching, and I will be back soon with another tutorial. See you soon.